I want to bring to your attention something new that's happening for the first time this year at the BAYT, and that is that we are allowing chasanas to take place at the BAYT between Pesach and Rosh Chodesh Iyar. This was not the practice in the past. The practice in the past was that the shul was dark from Pesach until Lag BaOmer, and the first chasana that was permitted after Pesach was on Lag BaOmer. We are permitting for the first time to hold chasanas here until Rosh and through Rosh Chodesh Iyar. And it's important to understand the reason for this shift and to understand how so there are a number of issues. Number one, on a communal level, what is the basis for allowing chasanas both before Rosh Chodesh and after Lag BaOmer? Even though we know that you're supposed to do either or. And question number two is, what is the individual supposed to do when faced with invitations for chasanas both before Rosh Chodesh Iyar and after Lag BaOmer? Because this would seem like a tarti disastri, like you're going to be contradicting yourself and you won't end up with one uniform conduct of a period of 33 days of Sefira. So for the background information, we just have two pieces of background information that we'll need before launching into the tshuva from Rav Moshe. It's an old tshuva of Rav Moshe. Hopefully some of you have seen this already, but it's always worthwhile to chazer it. The Shulchan Aruch writes in Siman Tov Tzadi Gimel, which is in Hilchas Pesach, which discusses Hilchas Sefira Sa'omer, Noagim shelo lisa isha ben Pesach la'atzeres ad Lag BaOmer. The minhag is, says the Mechaber, not to marry women between Pesach and Shavuos until Lag BaOmer, meaning from Pesach onwards until Lag BaOmer, mipnei sheba'osu zman mesu talmidei Rabbi Akiva. Because during this time, the students of Rabbi Akiva passed away. We know this very famous medrash. However, says the Mechaber, it's permitted certainly to get engaged, and in times when the minhag was to present kesef kiddusha not under the chuppah but a year in advance, that's also permitted as long as you don't consummate the marriage and make the big chuppah during Sefira. That's fine. And furthermore, says the Mechaber, that if a person jumps the gun and he gets together and organizes a chuppah mitten Sefira, we don't punish him. Now, what does that mean, we don't punish him? Simply put, we would not penalize such a person. But perhaps you could think, can you think of any other onesh that you give to a person? What about not attending his wedding? Is it right for the Rav to get up and say people should not go to that chasana? That would be a potential onesh, wouldn't it? Is the Mechaber perhaps alluding to the fact that even if there's a wedding mitten Sefira, don't penalize the wedding maker, and don't treat it as any other wedding. But let's see. We'll see. Perhaps we may be reading too much. Let's see how this plays itself out. Says the Ramah, Mihu milag ba'omer va'elach hakol shari. The Ramah, quoting the Abu Draham and the Beis Yosef himself, even though the Beis Yosef in the Mechaber doesn't cite this, if someone would like to close the door because of the noise, you're more than welcome to. The Ramah says that from Lag BaOmer onwards, all weddings are permitted. Because the Ramah, of course, is subscribing to one of the minhagim, which is that the period of Sefira is from Pesach until Lag BaOmer, and not any time after that. Let's take a look now at Sif Beis in the Mechaber. Noagim shelo lihistaper ad Lag BaOmer. So now there's a separate din. First Sif talked about weddings. Second Sif talks about haircuts, and the minhag is not to get a haircut until Lag BaOmer. Sha'omrim sha'az pasku milamos. Because the tradition is that that's when the students of Rabbi Akiva ceased to succumb to the plague. Ve'en lihistaper ad yom lad baboker, but a person should wait until the 34th of the Omer in the morning. Ela im kein chal yom lag be'erev Shabbos sha'az mistaprin bo mipnei kavod Shabbos. Unless Lag BaOmer falls out on a Friday, in which case you can get a haircut even on Lag BaOmer. Now this may sound a bit foreign to you because we all know that we are allowed to get haircuts on Lag BaOmer itself, and that's because the Ramah disagrees with the Mechaber on this halacha. The Ramah says, "Uvemedinos elu ein nohagin kidvarav." The Ramah says, in our locales we do not conduct ourselves like the Mechaber. Ela mistaprim biyom lag. but even on the 33rd, we get haircuts. Umar bimbo k'tzas simcha, and we increase our joy somewhat. Ve'in omrim bo tachanun, and we don't say tachanun. So that's from the Maharil. And for those of you who would like to recall why we should rejoice, even though it's just a day when people stop dying, so let's make a party. What? What's that all about? So go back to either a year or 2 years ago when we discussed this. You'll find it on KosherTube. Next, ve'ein lehistaper. Right? That's how else am I supposed to get the plugs in? Ve'ein lehistaper ad lag ba'atzmo v'lo mi ba'erev. However, says the Maharil, you should only get a haircut in the morning of Lag BaOmer and not the night before, even though that's still Lag BaOmer. But you want to have some of the day as a day of mourning, and therefore only in the morning. Mihu imchal b'yom rishon noagim lehistaper b'yom vav l'chavet Shabbos. If, however, Lag BaOmer falls out on Sunday, we permit you to get a haircut even on Friday, l'kavet Shabbos. Umishu hu bal bris o mal beno mutar lehistaper v'stir l'chvod hamila. And if you're a bal bris, if you're making a simcha of a bris mila, then you're allowed to get a haircut in honor of the bris. And finally, we go to Sif Gimel in the Mechaber. Yesh noagim lehistaper b'rosh chodesh iyar v'tos hu biyadam. Comes along the Mechaber and says that some people are lenient because of Rosh Chodesh to get a haircut on that day, but that is an error. That's an erroneous minhag. You have to conduct all days of Sefira from Pesach until Lad BaOmer, according to the Mechaber, and no days maybe do you get a free pass. Then comes the Ramah and says, Mihu b'harbe mekomos noagim lehistaper ad Rosh Chodesh iyar. He says, however, there is a minhag in many places that these days of mourning are not at the beginning part of Sefira, but rather they only begin after Rosh Chodesh Iyar. Va'osan lo yisperu milag ba'omer va'elach, or lo yisapru, I should say. Those people should not get a haircut after Lag BaOmer like the first custom. Afal pisha mutar lihistaper b'Lag BaOmer asmo. Even though if you hold the latter days of Sefira from Rosh Chodesh onwards, you are allowed to rejoice somewhat on Lag BaOmer and get a haircut on that day. Va'osan mekomo shenogam lihistaper milag ba'omer ve'elach lo yistapru klal achar Pesach ad Lag BaOmer. But if you're going to hold the first days, right, like the minhag of the Mechaber, then don't get a haircut at all between Pesach and Lag BaOmer, not even on Rosh Chodesh. And then finally, the Ramah says very important words, which we're going to be focusing on tonight. V'lo yinhagu bi'ir echas miktsas minhag zeh u'miktsas minhag zeh mishum lo siskodedu. And it's not permitted that in one town some people should go according to one minhag and other people go according to another minhag because of the prohibition in the Torah of lo siskodedu, which Chazal interpret to mean don't make agudot. Don't break yourself off into separate groups, but we all have to have one uniform custom if we're living in the same city or town. The kol shekain she'ein linhog heter b'shtein, and certainly it's not correct to be lenient and just go between Rosh Chodesh Iyar and Lag BaOmer and sort of cut off on both sides, because then you're really not getting in the requisite number of days of mourning. Fine. We'll just take a look at one Mishnah Berurah. And the Mishnah Berurah in Sif Katan and Yud Aleph says, V'lo mi ba'erev, where we talked about in Sif Beis that you're not supposed to take a haircut the night before in Lag BaOmer, just in the morning of Lag BaOmer. And you'll see why I'm quoting this Mishnah Berurah, because Rav Moshe will quote it momentarily. He says, V'yesh me achronim shemekilim lihistaper mi ba'erev. There are some achronim who are lenient to allow you to get a haircut the night before on Lag BaOmer. V'siyim el yirabah de mikol makom le'inyan nisuin lo ra'isi mekilin ki im biyom Lag BaOmer ba'atzmo v'lo b'layla shelafanav. Comes the El Yerabah and says that even though there are those who are lenient regarding haircuts to allow you to get a haircut the night of Lag BaOmer, and you don't have to wait until the morning, but when it comes to weddings, you certainly should not make a wedding the night of Lag BaOmer. Now, you should be at this point questioning your own practices, because ma'asim b'chol yom, that we do have weddings on Lag BaOmer the night of Lag BaOmer. You know that, okay? So we'll look into that as well. Achein keshachal Lag BaOmer be'erev Shabbos v'lo shasa dechak lasos b'yom efshar sheyesh lahakelo lasos b'layla shelafana. But if Lag BaOmer is on a Friday, and it's going to be very difficult for you to make a chasana on Friday, which is obviously not very convenient, then you can make a chasana Thursday night. Fine. Okay, Rabbosai, now you've got all the background information that you need to launch into this tshuva from Rav Moshe. Let's tackle it. Comes along Rav Moshe, and I recommend, this is a tshuva, the kind of tshuva that it's good to have a pen or a pencil to make markings for yourself. What I did, what I found to be helpful, is that I broke down this tshuva by inserting numbers into the tshuva, and I also broke it down into smaller paragraphs, because as you'll see, when you look into it in the Igros itself, you see that it's a little bit more difficult to decipher without sometimes just the visual breakdowns that we have here. B'dvar hanisuin b'mei hasfira b'kan New York u Brooklyn, Yud Ches Adar Tavshin Yud Ches. Okay, regarding making weddings during Sefira, here in New York and Brooklyn. You didn't realize Brooklyn is a separate place from New York, right? Here in the year Tavshin Yud Ches, 1958. So obviously this is one of the older tshuvas of Rav Moshe, and this was a response to Rav Yeshua Applebaum, who was the Nasi of the Vad HaRabbonim of Flatbush, and all of the other rabbis in Flatbush, the rabbis of Flatbush, that is who was Rav Moshe is responding to. Now, bidvar hanisuin b'mei hasfira b'kan New York u Brooklyn sheniskapshu anoshim mikol hamekamos asher hayu haminhagim mishunim. He says, let's face it, New York is a melting pot. It's a melting pot for Jews. Jews come from Galicia. Jews come from Russia. Jews come from Sephardic communities. They come from all over. They come from all different areas of Europe. And there were many, many different customs in all of these different places. A person really is supposed to go according to the minhag from the place from whence he hails. So comes along Rav Moshe and sets down, first of all, you got to realize, New York is a place which has the status of a town which has more than one beis din. Anytime you live in a city which has more than one beis din, so then there's no issue of lo siskodu anymore. There's no issue of, hey, you can't break up into two different groups. The city's large enough to support two batei din already, so one beis din can paskin one way, another beis din can paskin another way. And since we have Jewish communities that have coalesced into New York, so we have multiple Jewish communities, multiple batei din. There's no issur anymore of lo siskodu. There is no imperative to coerce people who come from diverse backgrounds and diverse ethnicities to melt into one minhag. So that's a very important principle, which I believe applies to any major Jewish community in North America, including Toronto. That's very important to know, that there's no issue of lo siskodu if some people do according to one minhag and some people do according to another minhag. It is perhaps arguable that when this community first got started, with the first 10, 20, 30, 40 families, perhaps it was, and there was only one shul in all of Thornhill, then perhaps one could argue that that was a one-horse town, right, or like a one-beis din town, and therefore you could establish one uniform minhag for all of the inhabitants, but that's no longer the case. By the time I come onto the scene, I see Thornhill as a thriving melting pot Jewish community. You've got the Kehillah Center, you've got the BAYT, you've got the Thornhill Community Shul, you've got Chabad, you've got several other smaller congregations. And so therefore this truly is a city or a town, even outside, even just within Thornhill itself, which has more than one beis din, so to speak.
Does that extend to, let's say, it's a completely different din, but the application for early Friday night, we do look at the larger city, and then we look at the locales, and we look at smaller, batei knesios or shuls. So there, we don't apply this as much. I wonder, what's the...
Right, what Laser is arguing is that when it comes to Kabbalah Shabbos, usually the community that davens, if the members of one shul are normally supposed to comport themselves according to the Beis HaKnesses where they daven. But there too, if there's more than one shul in the city, a person can say, I'm not nigrar after the shul which makes early Shabbos. I'm allowed, halachically, if let's say that our shul only had one minyan for Kabbalah Shabbos, which is early Shabbos, a person has every right to say, I'm going to go according to Chabad. They daven bisman. Person can't be coerced into saying because I have membership at one shul, I'm forced to be Makabel Shabbos, unless I've never seen a posik say that. But anytime there's a Chabad in a community, you could always say, I'm not nigrar after my shul. I'm going to go after what the Chabad does. They make late Shabbos. So I believe it's the same din. Okay. So therefore, Rav Moshe says New York for sure. Even in 1958, Flatbush certainly is not subject to the prohibition of lo sisgodedu. But there is something else besides lo sisgodedu that Rav Moshe is going to make reference to shortly. V'gam meharbi mikobos nishkachu minhagam. And furthermore, there are many people that live in New York now that don't even remember what the minhag was in the Alter Hay. So v'rotzim kvod taraso leida da'ati ha'aniya eich lisnaik. So you, Rav Applebaum, want to know, so what should people do? So comes along Rav Moshe, and he wants to pick apart all of the different customs. And Rav Moshe lists 6 disparate minhagim as far as what Sefira, the morning portion of Sefira is. We're on the bottom of the first page. Number 1, he says, the hamachaber b'simin taf tzadi gimel sif beis kasav she'en li histaper ad lamed daled baboker. That's minhag number 1. You have to conduct Sefira for all days from Pesach until Lag BaOmer, but beyond Lag BaOmer until lamed daled in the morning. Minhag number 2, v'yesh nogin kefi shemashma me'rama shelo li histaper rak ad Lag BaOmer. That's the second minhag, which is the Rama, who gives you 1 day less. Okay, but it's the same. Number 3, v'yesh noagin lihistaper ad achar rosh chodesh iyar v'achar kach ein mistaprim ad erev shavuos chutz milag ba'omer k'di'isa b'rama sif gimel uv'magin avram sif katan hey. So here's the third minhag, which is you allow yourself to get haircuts and to not observe the morning period of Sefira until after Rosh Chodesh Iyar. So the beginning with the second day of Iyar, going all the way until Erev Shavuos, with the exception of Lag BaOmer. That's the minhag that we saw in the Ramah in Sif Gimel. Minhag number 4, v'yesh shemistaprim ad echad de Rosh Chodesh Iyar, v'osrin me echad de Rosh Chodesh Iyar, ad rishon shlemei hagbola boker k'di'isa b'magin avram. The Magin Avram brings another minhag, and that is that through the 29th day of Nisan, people permit themselves to get haircuts and to get married. But beginning with the first day of Rosh Chodesh, that is the 30th day of Nisan, that's when the Sefira, the morning period of Sefira begins. But because you added those 2 extra days of Rosh Chodesh, you get to tack on an additional 2 days of permissibility at the end. So really all Shloshis Yemei Hagbala are permitted for you to get haircuts and so forth. That's the Magin Avram's minhag. Minhag number 5, the Yeshahayu Osrin me'achar Isru Chag de Pesach ad Rosh Chodesh Iyar, u'mistaprim bebeis yomim de Rosh Chodesh Iyar, u'velag ba'omer, u'sha'ar yemei Chodesh Iyar Osrin, u'mistaprim me Rosh Chodesh Sivan ve'elach k'di'isa b'Mishnah Berurah Sivkatan Tesvav Misidur Derech HaChaim. The Mishnah Berurah brings minhag number 5, and that is beginning from the end of Pesach until Rosh Chodesh Iyar, you're not allowed to do anything. But during the 2 days of Rosh Chodesh Iyar, they allow themselves to get haircuts. They also allow themselves to get haircuts on Lag BaOmer. And then on Rosh Chodesh Sivan, that's when Sefira ends for them. But the reason why is because they've started all the way from the end of Pesach through Rosh Chodesh Sivan, with allowing themselves the 2 days of Rosh Chodesh and Lag BaOmer, which also will add up approximately to 33 days if you do the math. And finally, number 6, v'yesha asru kol hayomim mi Pesach ad Shavuos levad yemei Rosh Chodesh Iyar v'Sivan k'di'isa b'Magin Avram Shav. And finally, the most machmir minhag, which is to say that all the days of Sefira are usr. You know, there's a days of mourning, except for the 3 days of Rosh Chodesh, 2 Rosh Chodesh days of Iyar, and 1 Rosh Chodesh day of Sivan. Fine, great. Next, turn the page. V'hine. So comes along Rav Moshe and he says, Tam shnei minhagim rishonim shehu ad lamed daled baboker rak ad lamel gimel baboker. So let's examine the first 2 customs. Remember, what were the first 2? Who wants to review? What were the first 2 out of the 6? Number 1 was the machaber that Sefira is noheg from Pesach until lamed daled ba'omer. And minhag numbers 2 is exactly the same except just one day short until Lag BaOmer. That's the Ramah. So Rav Moshe says, what is the reason for that minhag? He says, Baboker who number, which is going back, he explains number 1, Shesavri Teravayu da'asu lihistaper ad yom shapasku milamos. You're not allowed to get a haircut until the day when the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva actually stop dying. Aval pligi masai pasku, but the machlokus is, when did they stop dying? The hamachaber sover shapasku b'yom lamed daled mishum shemesu ad prosa atzeres shehu tesvav yom kodem atzeres. The machaber's opinion is that they stopped dying on the 34th of the Omer, because that turns out to be exactly 15 days before Shavuos. And that's the language of the Gemara, shemesu ad prosa atzeres. The word pros means a half month. A half a month is 15 days. Okay? So nisharu lamed daled yom umixas yam and lamed daled kekulo k'deisa bebeis Yosef v'bachu v'urei hagra sivkat and vav. So that's the reason for the first minhag until lamed daled. Number 2 is to explain the Ramah. V'hasovrim derakad lag ba'omer sovrim shepasku v'yom lag k'deisa v'urei hagra sivkat and tes. The Ramah is of the opinion that they stopped dying one day earlier, on the 33rd of the Omer. Al zeh shekasav haRamah shebiyom lag ba'omer marbin b'medinos elu k'tzas simcha shehamakor lazeh misof tainis mechamisha sor ba'av shemarbin bo simcha mishum shepasku meisei midbar nimsa detam shnei aminhagim shaveh shehu she'asru kol hayomim shemesu. The Ramah says that he notes that there's a minhag to have a little bit of simcha on lag ba'omer. Now, what's the reason for having simcha just because people stop dying? So he points to the Gemara in Tainus that says that when the people of the desert generation stopped dying, that day was Tu B'Av, and that's one of the reasons why Tu B'Av is a day of rejoicing, in the sense that, yes, there is an aspect of rejoicing or of relief when you know that death is no longer imminent. Whether that's an apt analogy or not, to point to that Gemara and explain that as the sole reason for so much celebration on Lag BaOmer is not the subject of our discussion tonight, but at least you see, Rav Moshe says, the reasoning behind the machlokus between the Machaber and the Ramah, whether it's Lamed Daled or Lamed Gimel. Once again, the Machaber says Lamed Daled because it's 15 days before Shavuos. The Ramah says Lag BaOmer is when they stop dying because that's the day when we know that there's celebration, which demarcates the day when they stop dying. Now he's going to jump to minhag number 6. And I actually put these numbers in to sort of help me remember what is what. So if you go back, what was minhag number 6? To aser all the days of Sefira except for the 3 days of Rosh Chodesh. He says, V'cheinu tam minhag ha'acharon she'asru kol hayomim levad me Rosh Chodesh. Shegam kein oser hayomim shemesu bahem, aval sover shemesu kol hayomim shemimei ha'Sefira. The reason for the last minhag is because this opinion holds that they died during all the days of Sefira. Avalo behayomim she'ein omrim bahem tachanun midina she'im zayin yemei ha'pesach b'shisha shabasos u'shlosh yemei Rosh Chodesh li'iyar b'sivan v'lachein osrim kol hayomim levad me Rosh Chodesh. Now it's a very clever mathematical equation. If you take into account the remaining 6 days of Pesach, add to that the 6 additional Shabbatot that are during Sefira, add to that the 3 days of Rosh Chodesh. Those are all the days when you don't say Tachanun during Sefira. You subtract those days from the 49 and you get a total of 33 days when you do say Tachanun. And that's the reason why you have to express mourning during the entire Sefira period except for Shabbos, the 6 days of Pesach and Rosh Chodesh.
Leave out Lag BaOmer?
Leaves out Lag BaOmer. Leaves out Lag BaOmer.
But that's 34.
Is it?
Yeah. 6 and 6 is 12.
6 and 3 is 9, and then 9 and 6 is 15. So
From
that's
49
34.
is 34.
Yeah, so you'd have
So
to
you
say.
would. So if you would add in Lag BaOmer there, then you would get your 33.
So maybe he does add in Lag BaOmer. I don't know. I don't remember him saying the Lag BaOmer, or maybe he doesn't hold of Erev Shavuos. I'm not sure. Yeah, but there's only 6 days of... actually, you're right, there is 7 because it's Chutz La'aretz, so there's 7 days.
Oh, 7.
You're right. Very good, Dr. Katchen. Okay, very good. Now let's go through 3, 4, and 5. 3, 4, and 5, if you recall, let's just review 3, 4, and 5 for just a second. Number 3 was that we go the latter days. We wait until after Rosh Chodesh Iyar before we start the Sefira. Minhag number 4 is that we start on Rosh Chodesh Iyar, so we start 2 days earlier. And minhag number 5 is that you add the days from Pesach until Rosh Chodesh. You get haircuts during those 2 days of Rosh Chodesh Iyar. And then on Lag BaOmer, you also get a haircut. And during the rest of Iyar, you are in mourning. But from Rosh Chodesh Sivan and onwards, you're allowed to conduct yourself with haircuts. So he says these 3 reasons, really, even though they're somewhat distinct and discrete from each other, he says, She'ein medaktikim lesser kol hayomim shemesu bahem. He says the reality is these 3 reasons are very similar, because we don't really care what the actual days when they passed away, these Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva. Ela me'achar shemesu rak b'lamed gimel yom d'cheshemenakin zayin imei ha'pesach b'shisha shabbosos u'shlosh yemei rosh chodesh shehem tezayin yom nisharu lag yom. So he says these 3 minhagim are that when you take 7 days away from Pesach, and you take 6 Shabbosos, and you take 3 days of Rosh Chodesh, you get 16 days, and you're left with 33, like the cheshbon we just made a moment ago. U'cheneged zeh noagu limnos lamed gimel yomim af im hashabbatot dimei hasfira li'isabel ktsas u'memela yesh yomim shereshayin li'istabir bohen. See, the difference between 3, 4, and 5, and 6 is that 6 says you can't count the days of Shabbos as days where you are considered to be mourning, because after all, it's Shabbos. I mean, so Shabbos is a day of joy. But according to Minhagim 3, 4, and 5, the 6 Shabbosos do count as part of the 33 days. And since they count as part of the 33 days, then you can use them as part of that cheshbon. Just count 33 days, no matter how you count them, either from Pesach until Lag BaOmer, or from Rosh Chodesh until Shloshes Yemei Hagbala, or any permutation of how you're going to end up with 33 days. We don't know exactly which days they died and they didn't die, but we do know that they died over the course of 33 days. So however you get your permutation of 33 days, it doesn't matter. Just as long as you have mourning during 33 days of Sefira, including Shabbos, then you're okay. So, Aval, and going back to minhag number 3, he says, Aval yesh shehischilu limnos me'achar Rosh Chodesh Iyar, sheyesh chavches me'iyar, vehei misivan, shehem lamed gimel she'osra. He says there are some who say start after Rosh Chodesh Iyar, so you'll end up with 28 days of Iyar, and then you'll end up with an additional 5 days of Sivan, and that'll give you the 33. And minhag number 4 is the yesh shehischilu limnos me'echad Rosh Chodesh Iyar. Some start with the first 2 days of Rosh Chodesh Iyar as part of the 33. Shehem Lamed Miyar. Then you'll have 30 days of Iyar, the Gimel Misivan, and another 3 from Sivan. Shehem Lamed Gimel Sha'asru Chutz Milag Ba'omer She'itiru Me'eza Tam Acher Mishum Shu Hilula de Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai Kidi'ita Vateres Zahav, or Vateres Zakenim. Right? He says, and that will say 33 days, and they'll give you a free pass on Lag BaOmer because of the Hilula de Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, which he just mentions in passing. We talked about that in previous years. And minhag number 5 is V'yesh Shimonim Behafsakos, and some say intermittently you have days of mourning scattered within days of permissibility. Shehu me'achar Isru Chag, Pesach, so you count from Isru Chag ad Aleph to Rosh Chodesh Iyar, Shehem Shisha Yomim. So first, your first days of mourning are the 6 days from Isru Chag until Rosh Chodesh Iyar, the Chol Iyar Levad Me Rosh Chodesh, and then you are permissive on the 2 days of Rosh Chodesh Iyar, and then you start counting again for the remainder of Iyar, which is another 28 days. So you're 28 and 6, and Levad Me Rosh Chodesh V'Lag BaOmer Shem Chav Zayin Yomim, so you have 27 rather plus 6. Harei Lamed Gimel Shalemim V'Lachein Matir Me Rosh Chodesh Sivan. And that, basically what Rav Moshe has detailed for us, and I'm sorry that if you got lost by, with all of the calculations, but basically he's detailed all of the 6 different minhagim and what their basis is. We're going to skip the parentheses, where he's going to ask a kasha on the Shar HaTzion and the Mishnah Berurah. It's a side issue, and we're going to continue. Vihine. Ledina hamachaber huchra ledina b'makomosenu dulo kamoso le'inin yom halag ba'omer. So we know for sure that we don't go like minhag number 1. which is the Mechaber who said that the mourning has to continue until the morning of the 34th of the Omer. We know for sure that that's not our minhag. How do we know this? Sharei einanu omrim bo tachanun. Umarbim bo kitzah simcha keharama uchinadumani sha'ata b'chol ha'olam af asfardim noagim bo simcha. Already by 1958 they were doing the Hilula de Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But the fact that Rav Moshe says, I think that's what people do today. So you see, even from this very language, that this Hilula de Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was only becoming popular in 1958. It's not like the way they make it today, right? But the bottom line is, he says, no one in the world paskins like the Mechaber to go until the 34th. Okay, that's so we can eliminate minhag number 1 from the roster. V'chein haminhag de osrin b'chol hayamim levad merosh chodesh kasav hamagin avram midhishmin haramah zeh shma mina shelo svira lehachi. We can also eliminate minhag number 6. He says there are those who hold that way, but the Ramah doesn't quote it, so the Magen Avram concludes that that's not a compelling minhag that we have to reckon with at all. So therefore, that minhag that is brought down by the Magen Avram to start all the way from Pesach and go all the way until Shavuos, with breaking down different days based on the 3 days of Rosh Chodesh and Lag BaOmer, he says that you don't have to reckon with at all. Okay. V'nishar lanu rak haminhag she'osin rak ad lag baboker v'achar kach matirin u'shlosha minhagam ha'acherim she'meshunam b'cheshbon halam gimel yomim ezela osram. So we're left with minhagim 2, 3, 4, and 5. Minhag number 2 is that they died during the first 33 days of Sefira, and on Lag BaOmer they stopped dying. And the other 3 minhagim are that they died over 33 days. We're not sure which of the 33 days they died during Sefira, but it was during that 33-day period, somewhere during Sefira, that they died. And so as long as you get up to 33 days, you're okay. But you see that Rav Moshe says there is a difference between the Ramah's minhag to go until Lag BaOmer and the other 3 minhagim, which are not that we know historically when they died, which days they died, but we know that they died over 33 days, and so therefore, as long as your math adds up to 33, no matter how you intercalate it over the course of Sefira, you're okay. V'lachein amina, davar chadash. And therefore I'd like to suggest a chiddush. Sheshlosha haminhagim heim nechshavim leminhag echad. That the latter 3 minhagim really count as one minhag. Why? The ikar haminhag hu shetzarach lihisabel lamed gimel yomim im hashabasos shebeineihem. Ve'ein chiluk ezel lamed gimel yomim me'elu hagimel minhagim. Or Rishayim l'shanos miminhag zeh lecheshbon halag yom leminhag acher mehem. And therefore he says, it's because they're all really the same minhag. They're all based on the same cheshbon, which is make sure that however number of, they're going to have 33 days during Sefira. There are 3 different ways to get to a total of 33 days. As long as you get to 33, it doesn't matter which days they are, right? And therefore all these 3 different minhagim are really one and the same, even though they're over the different days. There are 3 different minhagim over different days. So therefore, concludes the Rav Moshe, you have every right to change from one year to the next. You can change from a minhag, which is to go for the first part of Sefira, and the next year you can go to the second part of Sefira, because all these cheshbonos are based upon just getting to a total of 33. And that's really all the same. Okay? He says, V'rak ha-minhag derak ad lamed gimel hu minhag acher. V'yihi asu l'shanos chol din minhag u'vazeh kosav haramah shika mishum lo siskodedu shehu she'achadim yinhagu kiminhag hamachaber v'achadim kiminhag kehaminhag l'cheshbon halamed gimel yomim. Avol gimel haminhagim shekulam mehem b'cheshbon halamed gimel yomim leka mishum lo siskodedu rak mishum tam machlokes yesh lesa. So comes along Rav Moshe and says this chiddush. He says the only 2 minhagim that we really have to contend with is the minhag of the Ramah, which they died specifically for the first 33 days of Sefira, versus the other 3 minhagim, which is find a cheshbon of 33 days no matter what they are. The Rav Moshe says a language like this, which is a big, again, I don't know where he gets this from. He says there's no lo siskodedu even in a 1-horse town. Even when a town has only 1 base, then you can switch from one minhag to the other within the same town. There's no lo siskodedu because they're all based on the same reasoning. The only thing that you shouldn't do is have some people in the small shtibel do one way and other people in the shtibel do another way, not because of lo siskodedu, but because of machlokes. That you don't want people to get into fist fights, right? Which could easily break out over who's going to get a haircut. Okay. Anyway, who gets the good share? Okay. Now, so then let us continue now. Turn the page. V'chein b'New York, u'Brooklyn, u'Chedoyme, shekol haminhagim mikol ha'olam isnu, v'im kein lo shayach machlokes. So first of all, he says, in New York, everyone's from all over the place. Who's going to get into a fight over this? You could always say, I'm a Galitzianer. You could always say, I'm a Poilisher, right? What difference does it make? You say, you do your way, I'll do my way. We come from two different parts of the world. Shalom al Yisrael, who cares? So he says, Sheyadu azeh, l'chol sheyesh bekan kama minhagim, yachol kol echad l'shanos milag elu l'lag acherim, ach lo b'shana echas. He says, the only thing that you can't do, even if you wanted to hold, I hold this minhag, you hold that minhag, fine, no problem, no machlokas. The only thing that you can't do is change within the same year. Because you can't say, all right, I'll start at the beginning of Sefira, I'll start after Rosh Chodesh Iyar, but then I'll only go until Rosh Chodesh Sivan. You can't do that, because then you're not going to end up with a total of 33 days. You can't change midstream, but from one year to the next you can change. What you're not allowed to do is to change the minhag of 33 days as a calculation versus the first 33 days, which is based upon when they actually died. That you can't change from one minhag to the next. Then the Rav Moshe rejects that as well. Rav Moshe says that the truth of the matter is that even the minhag of the Ramah is really part of the same minhag. He says, what I've just told you up until now is according to the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon says that there's one minhag to calculate 33 days willy-nilly, whatever they are. And the other minhag is to say that during these 33 days, dafka, they died. That's according to the Vilna Gaon. But I hold, says Rav Moshe, that you could say not like the Vilna Gaon, that even the minhag of the Ramah, which you count the first 33 days, is also part of this idea of just coming up with a total of 33. Not that necessarily they died during those 33 days, but that it's still part of this idea of just get a total of 33 and you're okay. So therefore, Rav Moshe concludes, and we're going to skip a little bit because of constraints of time. He says, therefore, v'hinei, let's go to that paragraph of v'hinei. V'hinei mistaver la'anius daiti. She'ein lahachshiv tarti desasri mitispores l'nisuin. Now let's talk about something else. He says, first of all, we have to realize that there was one sif in Shulchan Aruch that talked about weddings, and another sif in Shulchan Aruch that talked about haircuts. Those two are two different categories of halacha, and therefore, just because you're machmir in one doesn't necessarily require you to be machmir in the other. And let's see what he means. Dinisuin shel bachur shehitiru lisa, af bimei avlo mishum priya urevia. We know that Chazal permit a person to get married even during his shiva, if he hasn't yet fulfilled the mitzvah of pru'urvu, or if he has small children and he needs a mother to take care of his kids. Vadai, im lo hayaminag miyuchad le'esar milisa b'mei hasfira, lo hayinu lemeidim me'isr tispores. He says, and therefore, kol shekain, if you're allowed to get married during shiva, surely you should be allowed to get married during a period of minor mourning, such as the days when you're not allowed to get a haircut. So, Zakt Rav Moshe, just because there are certain days where you have a minhag not to get a haircut during Sefira, that has no bearing on prohibiting you. That doesn't automatically mean that those days you're not allowed to get married. Va'af lami shekiyim mitzvahs pru'urvu, ubanav gedolim, nami al kol panim, yesh mitzvah b'nisuim, and he says, even if a person already fulfilled the mitzvah of pru'urvu and he's got grown children already, there's still a mitzvah of getting married, and just because you're not allowed to get a haircut would not necessarily be a reason for us to prohibit you from getting married. And therefore, says Rav Moshe, Av shenagu gam lesor nisuin, ein lahachshav tarti desasri mitisporas l'nisuin. Therefore, if, even though the minhag is that during Sefira we tell you not to get married, but don't base your prohibition of marriage on the prohibition of getting haircuts. And therefore, it's theoretically possible to say that we will permit a person in a certain locale to get married until Rosh Chodesh Iyar, or to get married after Lag BaOmer or after Rosh Chodesh Sivan, even though the minhag of that place is not to get haircuts. That's one thing they have to sit down. Just because the minhag is not to get haircuts during a period of time is not enough of a reason to prohibit a person from getting married. And then he quotes and he says, the Chassam Sofer says the same thing, and then he goes into a whole arichus, and we don't have time to go into that because of time constraints. And therefore, here's what I want to skip to. He says, well, I think we have to do a little bit of the tshuva from the Chassam Sofer. He says, "Umatzasi mefurash kein b'Chassam Sofer chelak orachaim simin kuf mem beis, demitispores l'nesuin ein stira zela zeh v'leka mishum lo tiskodedu. Umitam zeh matir bi'ir ketana." So therefore, the Chassam Sofer says on this basis, if you live in a small town, shelo yizdamein b'shana zu od chasana b'mei hasfira, that if there's only going to be one wedding during Sefira, and there won't be another chasana that will sort of contradict, because let's say one chasana will be before Rosh Chodesh Iyar, and the other chasana will be after Lag BaOmer. So you don't have that. You only have one wedding. And then he says, "Va'af the makomo Preshburg sha'isa ir gedola lo hayu makpidim tchila, v'hayu matirin b'nisuin af shebechol shana hayatarti desasre." And then he goes on to say that in Pressburg we went even further. Because it was such a large city, we permitted people to get married before Rosh Chodesh Iyar, and other people to get married after Lag BaOmer. Provided that what? Provided that every single individual has his own minhag of when he doesn't get a haircut. And also that if you're going to make a wedding during the first part of Sefira, that you continue along and you don't contradict that by making a second wedding after Lag BaOmer. So number one, if your personal minhag is not to get a haircut during the first part of Sefira, attending a wedding, says the Chassam Sofer and then Rav Moshe, attending a wedding is not a contradiction to that Sefira. And Rav Moshe demonstrates this, and he proves it by this. And I have to skip a little bit in order to be able to demonstrate this. He says, go to the bottom paragraph of this page. He says, "V'hinei achasam sofer sham b'techila kasav elo lefizeh lo yihiyeh hamasader kiddushin o echad mibnei hachupa me'osen shahaya b'chupa acheres b'zu ashana ba'ofen shehutarti desasrei af lo bi'ir acheres ayin sham." So the Chassam Sofer says a chumrah. He says, if you're going to go attend a wedding during the first part of Sefira, you cannot attend a wedding, and you can't even be Masader Kiddushin in a wedding that's after Lag BaOmer, even if it's in a different city. That's what the Chassam Sofer says. Comes along Rav Moshe and he says, "V'hu tamu'ah. The vadai ha-Masader Kiddushin v'chol hakruim rashai lios b'chupa shel minhag ha-mechaber u'b'chupa shel minhag ha-ramah. Ki ein ha'isr al hakruin hasmeichim b'hanisuin." This is the crucial line. He says the prohibition of mourning is not placed upon the people who are misameach the chassan and kala, because once there's a mitzvah of simcha, that supersedes the obligation to mourn. The ha'osin sudas, and I'll prove it to you, he says, the ha'osin sudas nisuin b'chol zayin hayamim kishenasab rosh chodesh iyar u'v'lag ba'omer af shehem b'mei hasfira. He says, you want to know the proof? We make Sheva brachas if a couple gets married before Rosh Chodesh Iyar or on Rosh Chodesh Iyar. We make Sheva brachas that extend into Sefira. So you see that even though the attendees may have the personal obligations of mourning, but because there's a mitzvah of being Mesameach Chassan V'Kala, that mitzvah supersedes the obligation of personal mourning during Sefira. And therefore, unehi shalachasin v'hakala ein lesser mishum shu yom tov shalahem v'ika chiyuv simcha, aval ha'acherim she'eno yom tov shalahem v'lek aleim chiyuv simcha eich semechem b'sudas hanisun b'mei hasfira. How can we permit it? I can understand you alleviating the chassan and kala because it's their personal simcha. You can alleviate them of their obligation of mourning during Sefira. But how do you do that with all the people who are at the Sheva brachas? Elavadai she'isru rak ala chassan v'hakala levad. And therefore, what we conclude is that everyone that is attending the chasana goes according to the minhag of the chassan and kala. So if they don't have a prohibition of mourning on this particular day because their minhag is that we are allowed to make chasanas in the first part of Sefira, then everybody else is drawn after their minhag for that event. For that event. So therefore, I may hold that the first days of Sefira are my personal days of mourning. I don't get haircuts. I'm not making any chasanas because that's my personal period of Sefira. But once I'm invited to be Mesameach Chasan V'Kala, at that event, my mitzvah is to be Mesameach Chasan V'Kala.
So where's 33 days then? You don't have that.
You have your personal 30, you're not getting a haircut. That's your 33 days where you're not getting a haircut. And you personally will not make a wedding. But to be Mesameach someone else's Chasana, because at that moment, at that affair, you are drawn after their minhag temporarily just for that evening, then you have the mitzvah being the Sameach Chasan V'Kala. And your Sefira Taka will go into Lag BaOmer, and once Lag BaOmer is over, you can get haircuts. So that's but what's clear is that if you're making a Chasana before, on the first part of Sefira, then for that year, your Sefira has to be the latter part, was the period of mourning. You can't say, well, I'm just making a Chasana just for one night. No. If the Chassan and Kal are making the Chasana, so then their period of mourning is going to be the latter part of Sefira. But for everybody else, that my attending that Chasana does not break my personal Sefira.
But if they're invited to a Chasana after Lag BaOmer,
that'll be fine. That'll be fine. Because then, even if your personal mourning is the latter part of Sefira, then you're drawn after, for that evening, for that event, you're drawn after their minhag.
Now, do you have to be invited, or just being with some effort in the color?
Well, that's a separate question. Are you allowed to crash away? You know, is there? I mean, you could argue. I have a mitzvah. Everyone has a mitzvah being Mesameach Chasan V'Kala, especially when it's an open bar. You know.
Doesn't say that you have to physically be invited by the Chassan and Kala, so that means that whether you take on that minhag, is there a differentiation by that, by saying that?
Reb Moshe doesn't make that differentiation as far as, he does talk about kruim, people who are, he says, Umash Meshaf Ba'avar V'Nasa R'Shorin HaKruim L'Sameach Imo. He says, and that's true, even let's say a person violates the halacha and makes a simcha during a period of mourning, during the mitten sphere between Rosh Chodesh Iyar and Lag BaOmer. Then anyone who's called upon to be Mesameach, it could be from that language, Robert, it means that if you've been invited to be Mesameach, then you also have a mitzvah of being Mesameach, even though he never even had a hedger. And that's what the Machaber means. So Rav Moshe, remember the Machaber says, Ein Onshin Oso? You know what Ein Onshin Oso, according to Rav Moshe, means? We don't penalize the guy who makes a wedding at an illegal time during Sefira by not attending his wedding. We attend the wedding. We don't penalize him by saying, I'm not attending. We go, because there's a mitzvah being Mesameach Chasan V'Kala. So let's just jump down to the last two paragraphs and we'll be done. V'nimtza. So it turns out, Sha'afu mater l'maskanaso gam la'oso ha'masader kiddushin l'osan akrim. He says, therefore, at the end of the Chassam Sofer, which we don't have time to go through the whole tshuva of the Chassam Sofer, but Rav Moshe wants to demonstrate that even the Chassam Sofer himself, in his final statement in that tshuva, permits the Masader Kiddushin and the invitees lihios b'shtei hachupos, to be at both chuppahs. You can be at the chuppah on Rosh Chodesh Iyar, and you can be at the chuppah on Lag BaOmer. V'nimtza she'b'New York u'chadoyme she'mutar lasus nisuan af ba'ofen she'im tarti desasri dehem kishtei ayaros. And therefore it seems like a place like New York, which has multiple different minhagim, and therefore it's like multiple cities within a city, that therefore it's permitted to have tarti desasri. She'ein lahachmir, af lahagonrib, meshulam rishayin got also mastader kiddushin v'osan hakrum lios b'shteya. And therefore it's perfectly permitted for all the invitees to go to both chasanas. You can have your cake and eat it too. V'lachein, and this is what I underlined in the last paragraph, v'lachein l'maisa, yesh lahater lichatchila, la'asos nisu and arachar rosh chodesh iyar. Lechatchila, it's permitted to make chasanas until through Rosh Chodesh Iyar, 2 days of Rosh Chodesh Iyar. V'chein b'Lag Ba'omer b'layla, and the night of Lag Ba'omer also. He, in the paragraph which we did not see together, he contests the El Yerabba that is cited by the Mishnah Berurah, who says that haircuts are more chamer than weddings. And he says, Adarabba, I've been able to demonstrate to you that we're more machmir by haircuts than we are weddings, because there's a mitzvah of being misameach, right? So he says, it doesn't make any sense. He says, he says, surely weddings are more lenient than haircuts. Just because the El Yerabba never saw it happen, that they made a wedding the night of Lag BaOmer, that doesn't prove anything. In order to prohibit weddings, you would need to have a known minhag that it's usr. Not that I never saw anyone being lenient. You need to know that for sure that you know that it's usr. And just because the El Yerabba never saw people being makel doesn't mean that you're not allowed to be makel. And then he goes on and he equivocates. And this is very interesting because Rav Moshe should now say that it should be okay to make weddings from Lag BaOmer onwards, but he doesn't. He says you can make a wedding from Rosh Chodesh Sivan ve'elach. He says va'af shekosafti shelahabach yeshal hatir gam milag BaOmer ve'elach. He said that even though I've written, according to my argument, that I've cited the name of the Bach, you should be allowed to make a wedding from Lag BaOmer onwards, because after all, the minhag Ramah is until Lag BaOmer, and everything after Lag BaOmer is perfectly fine. He says, Mikol makom lechadchila ein lahatir neged shitas hagra. Rak lahasfardim hanohagim kehamechaber. You still shouldn't be makel unless you're Sephardi. If you're Sephardi, where the minhag is clearly to just do the first part of Sefira, then you can be lenient to have a wedding after Lag BaOmer. Now, I just want to the commentary is that this part of the tshuva of Rav Moshe has deteriorated further as the communities became more multitudinous and more diverse, so that it's become customary for people to make chasanas routinely any day after Lag BaOmer. It is not the norm for people not to have weddings to be machmir and not to have weddings between Lag BaOmer and Rosh Chodesh Sivan, especially because there are so many Sephardim in various communities throughout North America. It's become pretty routine to be permissive and allow weddings from Lag BaOmer onwards. And only if it's a difficult situation, Ashkenazim can be lenient as well. But you see, in 1958, the Ashkenazim still were holding strong to one mode of practice. But in today's world, where so many Ashkenazim only go until Lag BaOmer, you see that there's definitely reason to be makel for this way as well. The bottom line that I wanted to bring out from this tshuva is that, number one, the reason why I felt compelled to change the standard practice, the status quo in the shul, to allow chasanas from Pesach until Rosh Chodesh Iyar is, number one, based on the power of Rav Moshe's tshuva. We don't live in a one-horse town anymore. We don't live in a one-based-in town anymore. We live in a community where there are many, many different minhagim, many diversities of ethnicity and so forth. But more important than that, we live in a shul whose a very large portion of its budget is reliant upon our catering business. Why should we tell a family from down south who are either Sephardim or have a minhag like one of the minhagim that goes according to the latter day of Sefira, and tell them that they should not make a chasana during the first part of Sefira, even if we could argue that this is the minhag of this kehila, right? But they come from a different kehila. And so clearly, if this is used as a wedding hall for a diversity of minhagim, there's no reason for us to close the doors and not allow the shul and the caterer to be able to support themselves and to be able to contribute to Mammon Hekdesh of the Beis HaKnesses. The only thing that a person could argue is if two families from the BAYT are getting married, should we steer them in the direction of only making weddings after Lag BaOmer, which is the status quo minhag. But to that I say to you, even within the BAYT family, we have Sephardim, we have Ashkenazim, we have Litvish people, we have Hasidish people, we have people from all different walks of life. And we need a lot more reasons to be mesameach than we need to mourn. So therefore, my position is that if we're open for business, we're open for business for all people. If people would ask me if there's a preference, I would say yes, we prefer that that if both families are from the BAYT, make the chasna after Lag BaOmer, because that's the Algemeiner minhag. But b'shas hadechag, if all the other dates are booked and you want to get married here, we're open for business, and therefore we allow you to have a chasana between Pesach and Rosh Chodesh Iyar as well. Any questions?
From the standpoint of the guest, who is invited to two chasanas, one after Lag and one before.
Yeah, so you saw that was Rav Moshe's language.
Clear
he
that
says
you
it's
can.
clear, even though it's Tarti Desasri, but you are not breaking your days of mourning by attending someone else's chasana. Your mitzvah of being Mesameach Chasan V'Kala is sort of like for that event, your status is based upon the status of the Chasan and Kala. If they've chosen to observe the latter part of Sefira, even though you observe the first part of Sefira, for that evening, you're at their beck and call. You're allowed to listen to music and dance your heart out, because that's part of your mitzvah as an invitee to be Mesameach Chasan V'Kala. Now, Gemina perhaps would be is that you should, I guess, not make a private dance outside the wedding hall. In other words, even though for that event you have a heter, don't listen to rock and roll on the way out of the wedding and on the way into the wedding on your car stereo or whatever. Yeah.
I heard,
or Shweki.
I don't know if this is that Moshe holds you're allowed to switch your minute from year to year. Is that based on something? He
said that. You're allowed to change your minute from year to year. Yeah.
What about Hey Ear? What about Hey Ear?
What about Hey Ear?
The Yamenu, doesn't it have the...
Rav Moshe doesn't address that issue.
Great.
Moshe doesn't address that issue. Halachically, it has the status of Sefira. Halachically, it has the status of Sefira. There are many Rabbanim who say that the rules of Sefira are suspended because it's a Yom Shenasa Bones, it's a day that a miracle occurred. But you have to realize that there are other Rabbanim who acknowledge the miracle, but nevertheless still say that because of the deaths of the students of Rabbi Akiva, we can't begin our own new minhag. You have to conform to one of these 6 minhagim, and since Hey Iyar falls out according to all of these 6 minhagim as a day of mourning, then even with our theological acknowledgement of the reason to celebrate on that day, we don't have a right to supplant the minhag of mourning on Sefira. Yes.
But we obviously do have a festive day.
We do because we celebrate Hakamas HaMedina, and so. But a person has to realize that that's not Ola al HaCheshbon of this tshuva. I don't believe that Rav Moshe is advocating that you can, if you choose Hey Iyar as your day of celebration, then just choose one other arbitrary day sometime after Lag BaOmer, and sort of do a swap. He's not advocating that. He's advocating that there has to be some kind of uniformity. It's got to be one of the 6. But with all that being said, I don't know. That's why I've always had mixed feelings about music during Yom HaAtzmaut. I personally have had mixed feelings. Not because of my theological skepticism, but rather because of my skepticism about altering these minhagim. The big part of me wants to celebrate, and a big part of me wants to say, well, I don't know, Rav Moshe didn't talk about it, so I feel sort of funny. So we'd have to examine it further. And
what do the Soloveitchiks say?
I don't know. It's a good question. Yesh la'ayin. You guys go out and tell me. Find some tshuvas for me. Tell me what they say.
Is the simcha dependent on the chassan kala or the family? In other words, can a family make a chasana before Rosh Chodesh Iyar and another chasana for another child after Lag BaOmer, if they're crazy enough to do that?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer. It seems that it's dependent upon the minhag, the personal minhag of the chassan and kala. But it could also be that because the parents are the ones who are actually making the party, that it could be problematic. I'm not sure what Rav Moshe would say about that. It's a good point.
But the couple themselves have these different minhagim.
Iyashar. Zelo yitachin. How can a husband and wife have 2 different minhagim? They got to have the... What?
They're not married yet, but...
Once the chuppah is over, they're married. She's got to go after his minhag.
No, but
or he's got to go according to her minhag. Whatever. They got to choose together. They have to choose.
No, but the wedding itself, one
The
family.
wedding itself demonstrates that they've chosen for this year